Well, hello, everybody. My name is Jeshua Frederick. Thank you so much for letting me share my story. I just want to give just like a short testimony for how I met Jesus and why I even believe in him today. And it's kind of a little bit of a winding road that I'm hoping some of you guys can relate to. So for me, I grew up in the church. My parents are pastors. And so even from like a young age, I was hearing about Jesus. But my story is a little bit unique in that, like, even when I was born, I was actually supposed to die. I came out premature, and there was a bunch of birth complications. And the doctors basically told my parents, like, your son is going to die. He's got no chance to live. I had so much internal bleeding in my head that when they set me down, my head would sag like a water balloon would sag, and I don't even remember the rest of the medical stuff, but essentially they said your son's going to die, and my parents, rallied people to pray, and there'd be a crisis, and then that crisis would go away, and a new one would come up, and that one would go away, and a new one would come up, and it was just this crazy cycle of like God answering prayer and then something else needing to happen, and then God answering that prayer and something else needing to happen. And eventually, slowly, the doctors came and would say, like, okay, he's guaranteed to die. And then it would move into this place of like, there's a chance that he might live, but if he does live, he's going to be a complete vegetable. Like, he'll be breathing, and his heart will be beating, but there will be absolutely nothing, going on as far as brain activity goes. And slowly, little bit by little bit, it just started getting better and better until like they ended up giving me back to my parents and be like, we have no idea how this is possible. But here's your son. He'll probably just stop developing at a certain milestone. He'll learn how to say a few words or something, and all of a sudden that'll be kind of like the cutoff point. And apparently I learned how to roll over slower than my peers, and everything else that aside from that or after that, I was at or beyond where I was supposed to be. And so growing up, like, I heard this testimony over just like of who I am, and heard like, God's got a plan for your life, and was kind of saturated with that growing up. So I believed in Jesus for as long as I can remember. But that being said, there's a couple or a few kind of landmark moments where things got really real along the way. And the first one that I can remember, I was in sixth grade, I think, and my youth group went to this youth conference in Toronto. I think it's called Catch the Fire Church now, but they have this youth conference that goes over Easter every year. And I went this first year in sixth grade, and there was the very first time that it actually really clicked for me that God is real. I saw people get healed. Like, I saw somebody with cerebral palsy who was in a wheelchair get prayed for and then get healed and be able to start walking. I started learning that that we can actually hear God's voice instead of it just being like, oh, God is real, but he's like up in the clouds somewhere and he does his thing, we do our thing. It was the first time that actually clicked for me, like, wait a second, we can have a relationship with God, and that's actually what this is about. And I got to actually see people walking out a relationship with Jesus that I didn't really know was possible, that they seemed to have a measure of joy that I didn't experience at all. They seemed to have a level of purpose and of freedom in their life, of walking in power, that they were being able to pray for people and see them healed. They were able to hear God's voice for other people and then encourage them, knowing things about them that they wouldn't have known on their own, just because God is speaking through them. And then later on, I would go back to my parents and be able to learn more from them about this stuff, like what's going on here. And they were able to, point me to passages like 1 Corinthians 14, where it says that, where it talks about prophecy, and it talks about like the purpose of prophecy being to encourage, upbuild, and console. And they say, well, so what these guys were doing is they were listening to God's voice for something that would be encouraging, upbuilding, or consoling to this other person, sharing with them what they felt like God was saying. And so this person would have a very real experience with just the love of God. And I had never experienced that before. And so it was a little bit, little weird, a little intimidating at first, to be honest. Like, when you it still is weird and intimidating. But when you experience that God is like a real God, then this stuff kind of comes along with that like, if God is real, then he wants to speak. If God is real, then he wants to do the same things that he did in the Bible. And so I started experiencing that for the first time. And in the wake of that, that's where I got baptized, where I said, like, God, okay, if you're real, then I want to really give my life to you. I really want to live for you. And so I was baptized then. Fast forward a number of years, I kind of I did my best to live that out and was still learning. But I went through this experience with my family that caused me to kind of question everything that I thought I believed. And what happened was, so my parents were pastors. There was this guy that was on their staff team, who was my youth pastor and my dad's best friend. I won't say his name, but he was like a mentor to me. He was the person who took me to that conference in Toronto, where I really started to learn more about like a personal relationship with the Lord. And my parents and my family went through this really hard time where my mom got breast cancer and my dad had blood clots in his lungs, and my mom's from South Africa, and she had a bunch of family in South Africa that were just going through really hard things. And it was just this really awful concoction of just like a bunch of things happening at the same time that really just like wiped my family out and really just like sidelined my parents, and they had to take a step back from pastoring the church for a while because they were in the hospital. And I didn't fully understand what was going on in the moment, but I just remember visiting my mom in the hospital and not really understanding what breast cancer was, and praise God, like they both recovered. But what ended up happening is we found out that my youth pastor and my mentor and my dad's best friend really had a desire to be the lead pastor of the church. And so when we were kind of out of commission, he ended up going behind everybody's backs and kind of stirring up lies about my family. And long story short, when my family finally came back from the sabbatical, or back from the hospital, and was able to re-engage in the church, they were presented with a demand to resign. And it was just a really just the whole process of it was filled with such a level of of hurt and deceit and desire for power from people that I really had admired, that it really just sent me over the deep end to see. I don't think I had experienced yet a lot of the just the sin part of the church yet at that point in my life. And to see kind of how that affected my parents, and getting uprooted from the only community that I ever known and the community they'd given their life to, and to see them still cling to the Lord as they're trying to figure out jobs and and process the hurt and all this stuff. I was kind of presented with two views, one of like my parents who are trying to like follow the Lord and like hold fast to him and process hurt well and lead their family well, but then also seeing like, you know, some of the people that I trusted most with like teaching me about God fall so short morally in so many different ways. I just remember being so angry, and so confused, and it led me down this spiral that lasted quite a while. And I remember it kind of culminating in this moment where I was in my room, and I just remember just like yelling at God and just punching things and swearing at him and just being like, I don't even effing know if you're real, and blah, blah, and just vomiting on him. And being so close to just being like, I'm going to walk away from every single thing here, because I don't know if this is real. And I don't want to do this if this is not real. And it was really like a defining moment, I think, for me, where I decided like, I'm not going to play games. I'm not going to do this just because I grew up this way. I'm not going to do this just because my parents do this. Like, if this is real, I need to know that this is real. Otherwise, I'm out. I am so out. I'm done with this, because I'm done with the people in this. But somewhere in that vomiting process, I think by the grace of God, like I landed at the spot where I said, like if you don't prove that you're real to me, I'm out. But then following that, like, I think just by God's grace, I was able to say like, but I guess like two things, like, but if you do, I'm all in. If you end up being real, then I'm also not going to play games. Like, I will give my life to you, because I don't have anything else at this point. Like, I didn't have, all my friend groups were gone because we had to move, you know, all of what I thought I knew was gone. It was just a complete state of limbo. And so I was like, you know, like, if you're real, then like I've experienced now that like that would be like the one thing that would be constant in my entire life, because everything else can change on a whim. So I will give my all to you. And then the second thing that I think happened at the grace of God was I arrived at like this point where I was like, I'm going to give you a shot, essentially. Like, I'm going to at least show up, instead of just being like, screw it, I'm gone. And you'll have to like chase me. For some reason, I arrived at this place of like, for like a month, I will at least show up every day. I'll give you the time of day, God. And if you can prove to me that you're real, I'll follow you. And so I did that. And for this season, I didn't have anything else going on. I just graduated high school and didn't know what was going to go on with my family. So I hadn't like gone to college yet, and had a involuntary gap year. And I had this walk-in closet that I just like, my closet was clean and the rest of my room was a mess, because I was like, all right, this is my space that I'm just going to go. And I'm just going to like, I'll do what I have learned how to do. Just like, I'll read my Bible, and I'll like pray, and I'll like just make myself available. I'll journal and try to hear your voice, and I'll just show up. And if God proves to me that he's God, then I'll stay. And so I did that for weeks and weeks. And sometimes I would sleep in there, and I'd stay in there for like 8 hours a day. And, slowly, very, very slowly, I experienced God come in very real ways and start to kind of like break down my barriers and break down my anger with him and with people. Like, first thing that he had to show me was like, okay, well, you might not believe that like I'm real, or that I'm good, or that I love you, or that I have a plan for your life, or any of this other stuff. So let's take these one at a time. And so firstly, he showed me that he was real. And so a bunch of these situations started coming up that couldn't have happened if they weren't real. So I'll give you one, for example, is that there was one time I got invited by a friend to go to this kind of like a worship night thing, and I didn't really get a chance to see anybody because I didn't have any community around me. And so I was like, all right, like, sure, let's go. I'll do it just to hang out. And so I went there and was about, stayed and was about to leave. And all of a sudden I hear this person go, Jeshua? And I turn around and I'm like, person staring at me, and I've got no idea who they are. And I found out later they had met me like maybe like 5 to 10 years earlier than that, like once at my parents' church. And they just happened to be there that night. Didn't know anything about what was going on in my life, just happened to recognize me. Felt like God told that person to come over and pray for me. And so he was like, hey, can I pray for you? And I was like, okay, sure. And he started, I don't remember exactly what he said, but I still remember like writing about it afterwards. But he started listening to God's voice and telling me things that he never could have possibly known about what was going on in my life, about what was going on in my heart, about how I was thinking, about how I was feeling. He never could have known. And things like that started happening where God started addressing like, hey, like, you might not trust my character right now, but I'm going to show you without a doubt that I'm real. And so like things like that would happen where I'd be like, okay, fine. Well, I admit that you're real. I don't like you very much, but I admit that you're real. And then like slowly he would start like, bringing people into my life that would just like minister and would just like love on me and show me like God's heart for me. And so slowly it went from like, okay, I believe that you're real, to, all right, I believe that you're real, and maybe you love me, maybe. And then it'd be like, okay, you're real, you love me, and like you care about like the hurt, you care about restoring my family as well. And he started just slowly just kind of like massaging his love and affection into my life to the place where like I was finally convinced and able to love him back again after a long last. He kind of just like wooed me for a lack of a better word, and just he showed up. And I remember asking him at the beginning, or kind of telling him and just being like, God, like, if you are who you say you are, then you're a big boy God and you can handle my big boy questions. If you are who you say you are, then you're a big boy God and you can handle like my big boy doubts. And he did. And I think that process, I think so many Christians are scared to doubt, because they think it means that we don't have faith, but that's not actually it. And so many times God can actually take our doubt as faith, like when we actually dare to like bring him real questions. And so I did that on accident, as I brought him my big, real, hard questions and had him show up in a very real way to me. So that was kind of the second landmark experience. And then the final one was right after that, like that long season of limbo where I was kind of like, before college and after high school. I got this random letter from somebody that I had known, a while ago, who was doing this missionary organization called Youth with a Mission, or YWAM. And I got this random letter from her just being like, hey, I was praying and I thought that you might be interested in coming to this program. You should check it out. And so I did, and I prayed about it, and eventually, like, I felt like God said, like, hey, you should go here. And I was like, okay, well, God, give me some confirmation or something, like, tell me for real that I should go here, like, prove it to me, essentially. And I felt like he said, like, okay, it'll snow today. And I was like, all right, it is like the middle of fall. It's still warm outside. I must have just heard him wrong. And so I remember, like, coming out of my little prayer closet and checking my phone, and a friend texted me, he's like, it's snowing. I love the snow. And I'm like, what? And I look outside and there's no snow. And I walk downstairs and I tell my mom, I was like, hey, so I felt like God said it would snow. And then my friend texted me that, like, it was snowing. You think that's God? And she was like, so if it's snowing anywhere else, she was kind of still like fearing being an empty nester at that time. So she didn't really want me to go. But she was like, so if it's snowing anywhere else in the world, but not here, that means it's God. Like, it's really nice outside right now. And as soon as she said that, a massive flurry of snow came outside that we both saw, but it was still warm enough that the snow just like melted on the floor, like on the back porch and stuff like that. I was like, tell me you saw that. You saw that. And she was dumbfounded too. But it was like, okay, well, like, I'm just going to take that as a sign. I'll go to this missionary organization. And it was in Denver. And they structure it like you've got 3 months. They call it a lecture phase, where you just kind of sink your roots into just like who God is and life as a follower of Jesus for 3 months. Then you do 2 months as like on an international outreach. We went to Mexico City. And when I was there, where should I go first? I encountered God even more deeply than I ever had before. I think, like, it was my very first night that I was in this time where we were, singing songs together to the Lord. We were worshiping, and I was really wrestling with feeling like God wanted me to, like, give up my ability to tell him no. It's a different story, but just like basically actually obeying him like I said I would. Again, just like something internal that I hadn't told anybody. And I remember, like, in the middle of this worship time, I was really wrestling with this. And this person came up behind me and started praying for me and said, Jeshua, I feel like I've got like 2 pictures for you. One is as a powerful man of God, and one is of you just kind of like broken down and beat up. And I feel like God's saying, like, Jeshua, you've got a choice between these 2 pictures right now. You can choose to follow me or to not follow me. But if you follow me, it requires your obedience. Like, what do you want to do? And I just had this like breakdown moment where like something in me clicked, and I don't know how I ended up on the floor, but it was like my knees just like gave out from under me, and I fell on the floor and started shouting out like, Jesus, Jesus, as loud as I could. And it was like, I was so terrified of myself. I was like, what the heck are you doing, Jeshua? I did not want any spotlight or anything. But just like this compulsion in me that was like, God, I know that you're real now because you've shown me, and I can't do life not being wholehearted for you now. And it's like, okay, Lord, I surrender. I give up. Like, you can have me. And I think, like, since then, that was probably the last of kind of like my landmark moments where I really I feel like I sort of like came through a fire and discovered really that like I believe this Jesus. I know him. And since then, like, my life has been completely different. I've got hope, I've got joy, I've got freedom in areas I never thought I would be able to have before. And so I guess that's probably where I should close. But I guess for anybody watching this, like, I want to encourage you guys that, like, God is a big boy God, and he can handle your big person questions. And so if you're like me and you're like, If this is real, I want in. If it's not, I want out. And like, first of all, like that's really okay. It's really okay to not have everything figured out, and it's okay to really want to experience God for real. And so, what I'd encourage you to do is to actually, instead of just like running away from God and just being like, well, catch me if you can, I'd encourage you to actually like press in and spend time with Him and be like, God, if you're real, show me, but I'm going to show up to you. And then just see what happens. Just ask Him to show Himself. Um, when I did that, it changed my life completely. So that's my story. Thank you guys so much for listening, for letting me share this with you. I hope that encourages you.